Hey, it's Nick here from Greyscalegorilla, and in today's tutorial, I'm gonna show you how to finish this rope simulation scene using Octane cameras, lights, and materials. If you haven't watched part 1 of this tutorial, be sure to check the description below where we show you how to set up this rope simulation from scratch inside of Cinema 4D. All right, with that, let's head on in and let's get started. All right, here we are in Cinema 4D, and let's make this rope render beautiful using Octane. Well, the first thing I need to do is go to my Octane layout. Now, we have a video all about how to customize your layout. We'll add that down below in the description. And once we have that all set up, we can now go into our render settings and turn on Octane. That's an important part of this step here. Once we go back, we can now fire up Octane, and you can see that by default, we just have a white void blob of a render. And this is the opposite of what we want. We want a beautifully lit, highly textured detail render that makes it feel like we could reach out and grab it. And to do that, we need to start playing with the important parts of 3D rendering, like lighting, materials, and cameras. So let's go ahead and start doing that. First thing we need to do is set up our camera. I'm gonna pause our Octane viewport just so we can get started without letting that slow us down. Go ahead into your objects menu here in Octane and grab an area light. Go ahead and grab that area light. It's gonna bounce to the 0 point of the scene, and we're gonna move it into the scene and up and rotate it around so that it's facing straight down. We essentially want this giant softbox up in the air, aiming straight down at our object. Now, if we hit Octane, you're gonna see that this light is now above. And we also have a problem. We have this default light in our scene affecting all of the renders. We also have another problem, which is our Octane light is not aiming the correct angle. So all we have to do now is just grab this and rotate it around 180 degrees. Much better. But how do we get rid of this backdrop? Well, let's go ahead and go into our Octane menu. Let's go to Objects and just click on HDRI Environment. By default, this HDRI will just be black, which is fine for now. And we're going to set up an HDRI in just a little bit. Now that we have just an area light lighting our scene here, it is just way too bright. So let's go down to our Octane light and tone down the intensity here. We actually want to do that in the tag. Click on your Octane light tag and turn down the power of this tag until it's bright, but not so overbearing. We also want to shrink down this Octane light. I'm going to grab our scale, shrink this down so we have a nice gradient effect happening where it's bright here in the center and the light falls off as it goes. Now that it's a little bit smaller, we might be able to get away with a little bit brighter light here. Now we're getting somewhere. Okay. From here, let's go ahead and set up a camera. Let's go into our objects. Let's go to Octane camera, and let's go ahead and turn that camera on. And let's make sure that our focal length is set up the way that we want it to. For this type of scene, I like using a more zoomed in lens. We have a ton of tutorials where we talk about focal length and the importance of lenses. I'll skip over all the details, but think about what lens you would use if you were a studio photographer trying to shoot this type of rope. Well, this rope is small. It's usually on a tabletop, and you want to be able to zoom way in and see the detail. And anytime you have that feeling, I want you to use a larger lens, something like a 180 or even a 200 millimeter. This will give us this effect like we're zoomed way in. Okay, now that we have our rough angle here, how do we start to add a little bit more light detail and also, of course, some of the materials? Well, let's first take care of some of the light detail. We're going to do that by adding an HDRI right to our sky. So inside of our Octane Sky, let's go to our environment tag. You're going to see by default, it is black, but if you want to add your own HDRI, make sure you go into image texture and then go ahead and click this folder, and you can find any HDRI on your hard drive and it'll load in. Now, if you're a Greyscalegorilla Plus member, you could literally just drag this into Drop Zone, which is another one of our plugins that helps you work really fast. It automatically sets up an HDRI link tag and it automatically adds beautiful HDRI lighting, and it allows you to then go into any of our HDRI collections and quickly select different HDRIs for different types of looks. I'm going to go ahead and scroll down here and grab one of my favorites for these indoor looks, which is Office Space. This has a ton of nice little detail, and it gives a little bit of an outdoor vibe. because it's so close to the windows. We got this little blue light coming in, but it is way too bright. We need to come in here and tone down the power like a lot. We barely want any of this bounced light around, just to catch a little detail. And then we don't want it to be in the background. So we can come in here and we actually what we need to do is go make a new HDRI environment and make this one visible environment only. Okay. This turns our background black and it keeps the original HDRI right here. So as always, when you're messing with materials and lights, you're going to make tweaks all the time. And that's what's so great about Cinema 4D is you could tweak and play with all this stuff. It is super parametric. It's ready to go. Okay, well, we have some nice looking gray blobs, but that is not the effect we're going for. Now, if you're not a Greyscalegorilla Plus customer and you have your own materials, now's the time you would add those here. But I do want to show you our brand new Paracord materials that are made for exactly this case. They just came out over at Greyscalegorilla, and they are made for all of these amazing rope simulations, and there's tons of different patterns and different colors to choose from. So I'm gonna go ahead and pick one of my favorites, which is this coral paracord, and I'm just gonna drag it right on top of the cloner itself. What this is gonna do is make a material for all of the ropes. And in just a second, we're gonna make each rope different. But for now, I wanted to show you the basic setup just by dragging it right on the cloner and putting it on all the ropes at once. So we have the material here, it's set up, but something's wrong. It is too stretched out. We do need to come into this tag and tell it that although the material is wrapped around the rope properly, we need many more tiles to be able to stretch along this long of a rope. And so to do that, all you have to do is come into your length V and set this to a lower number, something like 5. Instantly, look at that, we get the pattern we're looking for. And you'll know it's right when these little triangles start to turn more into squares. It still might be a little bit too stretched out. I'm gonna go to 3. There we go. Check it out. Now we're getting a more squared off braided part. And in fact, if we go too far one way, you're gonna see it starts to clump up a little tight on that end. And if we go too far the other way, it's gonna be too stretched out. That is not the look we're going for. I would recommend something 2, 3, or 4 to start. In fact, I love this look. Look at that. That's beautiful. Okay, so that is great. However, I don't want all the ropes to be the same material for this particular animation. And if we're trying to recreate the original, it had a different material for almost all the ropes. So of course, to do that, all we need to do is just drag different ropes onto different sweeps. And this is pretty straightforward. I will give you a little tip though. If you are in the blue family, if your render wants to be more blue or green, think about other colors that go along with that. That might sound obvious, but I'm kind of in this orange and black world in my head, and I want to select materials that are in that color family. So oranges, reds, yellows, browns, tans, all of these will work together. This kind of snake skin looking one, pumpkin, that's a fun one. And if I choose ones that are kind of roughly in the same color zone, they're all kind of gonna feel like they're in the same feel. They're not gonna contrast as much. Now, if you're going for more crazy, wacky rainbow colors, for sure, just pick random stuff. But I'm going for a vibe here. I'm gonna go for my orange, kind of darker vibe. And I encourage you to, follow your heart out there in the world. Once you have them all set up, you can now select them all pretty easily just by highlighting and dragging down. Once you have them all selected, you can now go down into that length V and set them all to the number that was working. In my case, it looks like 2 or 3 is roughly the right scale. And boy, oh boy, do we got some nice looking ropes here. Let's try to find a more fun angle. And now is a good time to talk a little bit about finding the correct angle for this animation. We have our camera. I do like this kind of looking sideways at the simulation feel. If I go back to the beginning of our simulation and we just hit play, Octane is so fast you can kind of see, not quite in real time, but very quickly you could see how this animation is going to play out with how the light bounces and You know, is it too dark? Is it too bright? And this is where I tend to make a lot of my creative decisions is in this mode of like, let me just hit play. Let me see different frames of my animation and kind of see what's bugging me. That's how I work. People work differently, but yeah, I tend to bounce around between lights and materials and cameras to really just focus on the thing that's bugging me in the moment. Right now, let me tell you what's bugging me, and it is the lack of bounce light on the bottom. There's not enough detail on the bottom of these ropes. And so what I'm going to do is just literally place a bounce card for light to bounce off of. And it's so easy. You could just add a cube to your scene. I'm going to keep my camera there and just turn off my Octane camera so I could place this cube. Literally going to take this cube, move it under my scene here, and I'm going to move it as close as possible, but without the camera seeing it. And I'm going to zoom back in on my Octane camera, and now you could actually look at the difference. See the bounce light coming up on these bottom pieces? Let me turn off the cube. Let me turn on the cube. That is an untextured cube, folks. And if you want more control, you could go dial in any, you could just put a plain white material on it, or I could just type in something like white here into our material browser. And I could drag something out just like a white plastic. So I'm just going to put that on our cube. That is going to put it in the Octane world. And now we literally can dial this reflection up and down just by moving the cube closer and further away from these ropes. We also can stand with a little bit more top light. I'm going to go back into that Octane light and crank it up a bit. I think it's okay if things get a little bright. I'm not in love with this, whatever color that is, just off the bat. Like, I want to go change it. It might be that one. Let's go ahead and swap that puppy. I'm going to scroll down back to our Paracord Materials, and maybe we just need like a white one there that is a little color neutral. It's got a little green in it, but maybe that will make it stand out a little bit less. All right. I like this angle, but it's missing something super important, and that is depth of field. So let's dial in our camera's depth of field so that we could get just the right amount of blurriness in this render to make it look even more realistic. All right, so how do we do that? Let's go into our Octane camera right here. Let's go click on this Octane tag. Let's go to our thin lens settings. And I actually am always confused if it's in here or here. So let's learn together, folks. I think it's under here, and I think we did it right. So in your f-stop, literally, if you just start cranking this down, you're going to start to see blurriness in your scene. It's that easy. You want to make sure that this is a realistic number. If you find yourself cranking things way down, it probably means that your scene scale is off. We talk a lot about scene scale. We have other videos around that dig more into that, but just know that creating a scene that is as close to the proper world scale is always super helpful when it comes to making things realistic, making simulations look real, and especially when it comes to your camera settings. So you can see, while we do have depth of field and some blurriness, everything is blurry. We do not want that. Okay. How do we fix that? Well, we need to tell Octane what we want to be in focus. And there's a thing right here called focus object. Now we could pull one of these ropes in, but I want more control. So that means I'm going to use a focus null. This is something I put in almost every scene file. I'm going to add a new null. I'm going to double click on it, just name it focus, just so I know what it is. In my Octane camera, I'm going to drag this puppy down, put it in focus object, and then I'm going to grab my focus, go on model mode, click on my place tool, and literally now, anywhere I click is in focus, and everything else is blurry behind and in front of it. And if I want this rope to be in focus, I click that. It's that easy, folks. I love this thing. Once you have that set up, now it's time to dial in that final look. I love this kind of diagonal feel, like we're looking down on the ropes. A couple things stand out. Again, this white rope is bugging me again. It could just be that it's standing out too much. Could be that our light is a little bit too bright. But let me just swap this thing again and see what else we get. I kind of like these darker tones. I don't mind that blue in there. From here, I'm thinking our light might be a little bit too bright. Let's go ahead and dial that down. And I'm also reminded that we should check our render settings. So right here, this little gear in Octane, you can open it up and you can see that the default here is direct lighting We want this to be path tracing. So let's go ahead and turn on path tracing and see what happens. We do get a little bit more bounced light. And really, in fact, for this render, it wasn't too drastically different. And to be honest, direct lighting renders faster. You may want to experiment with that. However, path tracing is much more realistic, especially when it comes to bounced light like that cube that we set up. Probably don't need 16,000 samples. I'm just going to set this to 1,000 for now. And you may need to set that a little bit higher when it comes to the final render if you see any grain or your depth of field isn't as clean as you want it. But from here, we are getting some nice shadow here. We got some nice bounce light, and our depth of field is cleaning up pretty good. From here, let's set up another camera angle just so we have a couple options. I'm going to go ahead and select our camera. I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste and click on this camera, and it's going to share the same focus null. If you don't want them to share the same focus null, you just create another focus null for this camera and drag it in here. Maybe just name it something different. For this look, I'm trying to go from the side and maybe pick up a little bit more of a wide shot that we can maybe jump between. There was also a really cool shot in the original that was more or less from this angle of all the ropes kind of like flopping together. So let's see if we can find a cool one here. Let's go ahead and let the simulation run a little bit longer. Oh yeah, look at that. That's pretty fun. Depending on the look you're going for, again, this light may have to be dialed up or down. I'm gonna tone it down and just push our HDRI a little bit more, just so we don't get that drastic hot spot right here. I think that hot spot looks better when we're a little bit more close up. But now we're into those subtle little changes that is, for me, the longest part of a scene is how to make it look beautiful and how to dial in those extra little details so that when we hit render, we have natural light bouncing off beautiful materials with lenses that are set correctly. And the closer you get to those settings, the more realistic and beautiful your render will be. So in this case, I want this original HDR that we set up to be a little bit brighter. I'm trying to dial it in subtle so we're not cranking it. A little goes a long way. If things are too bright, again, that's a no-no as well. That is, especially in this black void, you don't have a lot of light bouncing around. You don't want things to be that bright. You want things to fall into shadow. I'm already thinking that's too bright. That's much better. So now, look at that. Now we got some beautiful depth of field. We got our bokeh now. That's probably too high, to be honest. Let's go in here, and if you want to change the amount of blurriness, go back in your thin lens settings, go to your f-stop, and crank it up. Some common f-stops tend to go anywhere between 1.5 all the way up to like 20 or 30. So you want to keep it within that range. And honestly, for 3D, I am usually between 1 and 10. And I never really stray from there. 10-ish is, look at how in focus so many things are, but there's still a little bit of blur. You want that. And then, of course, if you want to crank it down and down, you get more of this exaggerated focused effect. All right, so we have some camera angles. Sorry, this is the sideways camera angle. This is either the straight on one, which I love that. Look at that look. That's fun. Or I think from the side might be a cool look. Let's go ahead and hit play here from the side and see what we get. Make sure it's in frame, of course. We get some nice moving, some undulating. It's moving off frame a little. That's okay. That's okay. There we go. And we're starting to get this twisting. And I love using Octane and seeing these results so fast. It's just so fast here in the live viewer. And it's like a nice way to preview an animation without kicking it out to your picture viewer. All right, this is looking pretty good. For the final, we may have to dial in our animation. But I think for the most part, that's a great angle. Let's flip this around. Let's look at this one. It's a little bit low. We may have to zoom out and move it. And we don't want to lose that focus. All right, that looks pretty good. Always a constant balance here as we move cameras. I am going to turn that light up yet again, very subtly. A little bit goes a long way. All these changes are little tweaks. I know I've said it over and over in many different videos, but these are the important parts of it. All right, from here, what else would we do? Well, now you have some creative decisions. You can go into your Octane Sky and you could leave it black like it is, or let me be clear, we have two Octane Skies. The first one is our HDRI. Our second one is literally just the black background. From here, we could decide, do we want the black background? If so, do nothing. If you want colors, then go into this little triangle, go to C40 Octane, and you want to go to RGB, where is it? RGB Spectrum, and boom, now you have a white background. And if you click on RGB Spectrum, and you can click on either the color picker, where you could just like pick a color from here, and then play around with that, tone it up or down. Or you could just literally click on our little color chooser and play around until you get the look you want. I like this more darker vibe for this render, but I do like a little bit of gray in the background. So I am going to dim it down. There we go. That's better. And of course, go crazy if you want to go crazy. A common color these days is kind of like this little off-white tan thing. You've probably seen this around in the 3D world. Common look, looks great. For this vibe, let's go more with the original and let's make it a little bit darker. That is looking mighty fine, my friends. All right, one more final thing we need to do before we hit render, and this one's extra important, and that is turn on ACEs. We probably should have done this early on. Remember when we were messing with this area light and we couldn't really find the balance between it's too bright, it's too dark? Well, ACEs really, really helps with this a ton. And if you don't have ACEs turned on, this is how you do it. It's so much easier these days with Octane. All you have to do is click on this gear and go into your settings here, go to your camera imager, click on OCIO and set your OCIO view to ACEs RGB. And if that isn't here, if none of this stuff is here, I highly encourage you to watch our ACEs video where Chad Ashley goes really in depth on how to set this up. But that should work. The only other thing you have to do is go here and turn on OCIO sRGB. Click that and look at that. Couple things happen. One is it got darker. The other one is ACEs really lets you crank the light and it falls off much more naturally. In other words, if we go back into this area light that we were having issues with and crank it more, we start to see that it's a much more natural fall off between the bright parts and the dark parts. And to me, this looks way more natural, especially with bounced light around a room. If you have bright scenes, this affects even more using ACEs. So highly encourage you do this before you hit render. I love the contrast in this now. In fact, I want to zoom in and get a little bit more of a close-up look at what the heck we have going on here. All right, from here, you should know what to do. You just go in and finally dial in your final render settings. We won't go into all the detail in this video. We have tons of videos that go into render settings. Look for those around YouTube. But you want to make sure, of course, that you're saving these files. I like PNG 16-bit. And you want to set your resolution. And of course, the all-important, go here to frame range and change it from current frame to all frames. And when you're ready, hit that old Shift-R. It's going to ask you, well, I'm not saving it, but so that's okay. And it'll start rendering, my friends. If you make a beautiful render that you're proud of, please post it on Instagram or on Twitter and use the hashtag MadeWithGSG. We love seeing those of you out there following along and making beautiful renders right along with us. Thanks for watching, everybody. And if you made it this far, consider subscribing to our YouTube channel, where we have hundreds of videos showing you how to save time and make more beautiful renders in Cinema 4D. And with that, I hope you have a wonderful day, and I hope to see you in another tutorial really soon. Bye, everyone.